Beneath the surface of your daily life, behind the mask you wear to meet the expectations of the world, there is a silent question that gnaws at the soul. Why do certain people seem to drain you, confuse you, twist reality itself until you no longer trust what you feel? Perhaps you have known the strange grip of someone who smiles while suffocating your spirit, who flatters you while planting seeds of doubt in your own worth. You sense their hunger, their unspoken need to control, and yet you hesitate because you cannot name it. That uncertainty is the very soil in which manipulation thrives. Carl Jung once observed that the meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. But before you can face your own depths, you are forced to meet the shadows of others, and among these, the narcissist casts one of the darkest. When you encounter such a figure, it is not only their words or gestures that unsettle you, but the psychic field they create. They do not simply interact with you, they enter you pressing against the boundaries of your being. They reflect what you long to see, while secretly feeding on your attention. You feel both seen and erased. This paradox is not an accident. It is their craft, honed unconsciously or deliberately rooted in a desperate attempt to defend themselves from their own emptiness. The narcissist at their core is terrified of their own shadow. They cannot bear to meet it directly. Instead, they project it outward, manipulating others into carrying the unbearable weight they refuse to claim. And so you find yourself drawn into a theater not of your own making. At first you might play the role of admirer, believing in the light they shine. But as time moves, that light becomes blinding, scorching, until you can no longer distinguish between what is theirs and what is yours. In Jungian terms, you are caught in the play of the persona, the mask one wears for the world. Narcissists build theirs with exquisite precision, glittering with confidence, charm, and superiority. But behind the mask lies a fragile, wounded child desperate not to be seen as weak, insignificant, or unworthy. They protect that child by ensuring others carry the burden of vulnerability instead. Think for a moment about how you have felt in the presence of such a person. Perhaps you noticed that your words became hesitant, your clarity dimmed, your sense of self shaken. This is not because you are weak. It is because the narcissist often unconsciously seeks to enter the very space where your identity is still tender, where your own shadow is waiting to be acknowledged. They do not merely exploit your flaws, they awaken them, amplify them, distort them. And so you are left asking yourself, is it me? Am I the one at fault? This is their silent triumph to make you doubt your own soul. But here lies the deeper psychological truth. Every manipulation, every subtle cruelty is a mirror of their own inner war. Jung spoke of projection as the act of casting out what we cannot accept within ourselves. The narcissist projects their unworthiness into you and then attacks it from the outside. What you feel as their judgment is actually their self-hatred disguised and displaced. What you sense as their control is their terror of losing control over the chaos within. And while this knowledge does not erase the pain, it grants you a measure of clarity. For when you begin to see through the illusion, their power begins to weaken. Yet the danger is not only external. There is a reason you were vulnerable to their spell. Somewhere within you lies a resonance, an echo of the same archetypal drama. Perhaps you carry an unhealed wound that longed to be filled by their approval. Perhaps you have denied your own shadow, your own anger, your own hunger for recognition, and so you were susceptible to theirs. This is the hard truth Jung never softened. What we meet in the other is always also within ourselves. The narcissist is not only an oppressor, they are also a messenger dragging you unwillingly toward the places in yourself you have avoided. And here is where the journey turns. For although the experience of being manipulated may feel like a theft of your soul, it also plants the seed of awakening. If you can resist the temptation to remain a victim, if you can turn your gaze inward, rather than endlessly analyzing the other, you begin to retrieve what was lost. You begin to notice the places where your boundaries were porous, where your hunger for love made you blind, where your silence allowed deception to flourish. These recognitions sting, but they are the beginning of individuation, the slow, difficult birth of the self, which Jung saw as the true purpose of life. To walk this path, you must allow yourself to feel the grief of betrayal without drowning in it. You must permit the anger to rise without letting it consume you. These emotions, once feared, become allies when held with awareness. They mark the boundaries of your true being, reminding you that you are not here to serve another's unquenchable hunger. Each time you recognize, "This is not mine," you reclaim a fragment of yourself. Each time you see the projection for what it is, you strengthen the container of your own psyche. But perhaps the most profound shift comes when you recognize that the narcissist is not your ultimate enemy. They are the embodiment of a universal pattern, the human attempt to flee from the unbearable confrontation with the unconscious. In their distorted dance, you are shown what happens when one denies the shadow completely. It becomes monstrous, manipulative, hollow. And in seeing this, you are offered a choice. Will you follow the same path of denial, or will you dare to turn inward to meet your own darkness directly? There is a strange mercy in this encounter, for though it wounds you, it also calls you to courage. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The narcissist forces you to taste that darkness, and in doing so, they awaken the possibility that you might choose differently, that you might no longer outsource your power, your truth, your worth to another, that you might begin the slow, painful, beautiful task of integrating the shadow within yourself. As you stand here, perhaps still reeling from such an encounter, remember that you are not alone. The path of awakening is never solitary, even when it feels most isolating. The very fact that you recognize manipulation means the spell is breaking. You are beginning to see. You are beginning to wake. And in that awakening, there is hope not only for freedom from the narcissist, but for the deeper liberation of your own soul. They told you they loved you, but you felt a hidden edge beneath the words. They praised you, but it left you strangely empty. They looked at you, yet somehow it was not you they were seeing, but a reflection they needed to survive. This is the paradox you begin to grasp. The narcissist does not truly perceive others as whole beings. They see instruments, mirrors, sources of energy. In Jung's language, you might say they are ensnared by their own persona, that fragile mask built to dazzle the world while concealing the unbearable vulnerability beneath. And because they have lost touch with their deeper self, they cling to others as if their very survival depended upon it. But you in this relationship become more than just a companion. You become the stage upon which their unresolved battles are enacted. They project their disowned shadow into you, the fears, the shame, the dependency they cannot tolerate within themselves. And so when they accuse you of being selfish, when they insist that you are needy, when they diminish your worth, they are speaking to the parts of themselves they cannot bear to face. You are made to carry what they cannot hold. This is why it feels so confusing, so destabilizing. You sense their words are not quite true, yet they pierce you all the same because they touch the raw places where your own shadow waits. Every human being has a shadow, not only narcissists. Jung described it as the sum of all the qualities we disown, repress, or deny. And so, it is not merely a collection of negative traits, but also untapped strength, creativity, and life force that we have buried. When you meet a narcissist, their shadow presses against yours. Their refusal to see their own darkness forces you to confront yours. This is the painful alchemy hidden within manipulation. It draws you unwillingly toward the places in yourself where you are most fragile, most incomplete, most in need of recognition. If you have ever found yourself walking on eggshells, silencing your truth to avoid conflict or doubting your memory, because their version of reality was more insistent, you have already felt the weight of this projection. You begin to mistrust not only them, but yourself. This is the great danger, to lose contact with your own inner compass. Once that is gone, you are like a boat adrift, guided only by the shifting winds of another's moods. This is precisely what serves the narcissist. For the more you lose your center, the easier it becomes for them to dictate reality. And yet here lies the strange possibility. If you dare to stop looking only at them, if you dare to ask, "Why did I allow this? Where in me does this echo live?" then you begin to awaken. For manipulation is not sustained by the manipulator alone. It takes root in the soil of your own unmet needs, your own longing to be loved without question, your own hope that someone else might heal what you fear to face. This is not a condemnation. It is an invitation. It means that even in the deepest entanglement, you hold a key to freedom. But that key is inward, not outward. Notice how your body responds when you begin to reclaim this key. The heaviness in your chest that once felt like despair may shift into anger. And anger, when seen clearly, is a boundary taking shape. The tears that once fell from helplessness may begin to carry clarity, cleansing you of illusions. The silence that once came from fear may transform into a pause of recognition. This is not mine. This is their projection. I need not carry it any longer. Each such moment, however small, is a return to yourself. Jung believed that the self, the wholeness at the center of our being, can never be destroyed. It may be buried, distorted, or forgotten, but it waits quietly for the moment of remembrance. In encounters with narcissists, this self is threatened, obscured, even violated, but paradoxically it is also called forth. For when you reach the edge of being hollowed out by another, you are pressed against the question of who you truly are when everything false is stripped away. This confrontation, though born of suffering, is the seed of individuation. The process is never clean, never simple. One day you may feel strong, certain, awake. The next you may fall back into doubt, longing for the very approval you know will never come. This is not failure. It is the rhythm of healing the psyche, weaving new patterns as the old ones unravel. In the mythic sense, you are descending into the underworld where shadows dwell. But remember, every descent carries within it the seed of ascent. Just as Persephone returned to the world of light, you too carry within you the possibility of rebirth. In these depths, you may begin to dream differently. Perhaps you see images of masks, of mirrors, of rooms where your voice cannot be heard. These are not meaningless illusions. Jung taught that dreams are the direct voice of the unconscious speaking in symbols to guide us. When you dream of being silenced, your psyche is showing you where you have abandoned your voice. When you dream of endless mirrors, it is revealing how lost you have become in the eyes of another. To attend to these dreams, to listen without fear, is to receive the map of your own healing. And healing in this context is not the naive hope that the narcissist will change. It is the deeper recognition that you can no longer abandon yourself. Each time you feel the pull of their charm, pause and turn inward. What in me is hungry for this illusion? What part of me still believes I am not enough on my own? In asking this, you stop being their prey and begin being your own witness. This is where transformation begins, not by fighting them, but by reclaiming you. There is a line from Jung that echoes here with uncanny power. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. To remain unconscious of your own shadow is to remain at the mercy of others' projections. To awaken is to see with painful clarity both the wound and the possibility within it. And though this awakening is difficult, it is also the beginning of freedom. So let the confusion you have felt not be wasted. Let the betrayals and distortions become teachers. For each moment of suffering has carved a space within you that now longs to be filled not with another's false light, but with the steady flame of your own truth. It is there waiting. The narcissist may have tried to blind you to it, but they cannot extinguish it. Only you can choose to turn toward it. And when you do, you will realize that what they tried to manipulate was never truly theirs to hold. There is a silence that follows when the narcissist leaves the room, but the silence is not peace. It is an echo chamber filled with fragments of their voice inside your mind. You replay their words, their subtle tones, the contradictions that left you second-guessing yourself. You find yourself arguing with phantoms, rehearsing explanations you will never give, seeking clarity in a conversation that never had truth to begin with. This is the residue of psychological manipulation. It lingers not in their presence, but in the shadows of your own psyche. And this is where the deeper battle begins, not against them, but against the part of you that still bends toward their gravity. In Jungian terms, you are caught in a struggle between the persona and the shadow. The persona, that social mask you have long relied upon, whispers that you must remain agreeable, likable, desirable, in order to be safe. It insists that harmony is survival, even if the cost is your own truth. The shadow, on the other hand, roars in protest. It holds the anger, the defiance, the unmet needs you have silenced for years. And now, under the pressure of the narcissist's distortion, the shadow demands to be seen. If you resist, if you keep banishing it, you will remain split forever, repeating the cycle of entrapment. But if you turn toward it, if you dare to look it in the eyes, you may discover that what you thought was monstrous is also the source of your liberation. You might begin to feel anger rising raw, volcanic, frightening in its intensity. Do not mistake this for a sign of becoming like them. Anger is the flame that illuminates the boundaries of your soul. It is the voice of the shadow saying, "No more." This does not mean retaliation. It does not mean descending into cruelty. It means reclaiming the sacred right to say, "This is who I am. This is where I end. This is where you cannot follow." Without anger, you cannot truly awaken, for it is anger that tears away the mask of compliance and forces you to stand as you are. And yet the shadow is not only anger, it is also longing. It is the part of you that hungered so deeply for recognition that you tolerated the illusion of love rather than face its absence. It is the child within who still waits to be seen, held, valued without condition. The narcissist exploited that longing, weaving their charm around it, binding you to them. But if you allow yourself to feel the longing directly without hiding from its pain, you may discover that it carries a sacred message. The longing itself is proof that you were born for love, that you carry within you an image of the self that knows what it means to be whole. In Jung's language, this is the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine aspects of the psyche, the inner figures through which we relate to ourselves and to others. The narcissist may have awakened these archetypes within you but distorted them. Perhaps they mirrored a false anima seducing you with beauty but offering no depth. Or perhaps they mimicked a false animus projecting power and certainty while masking fear. These illusions are dangerous, but they are also instructive. For when you see through them, you begin to awaken to your own inner figures. You realize that the nurturing you sought outside is also within you. The strength you admired in them is also your own potential. The false guides point paradoxically toward the true ones waiting within. This recognition does not come all at once. At first, it may feel like disorientation. Who are you without their reflection? Who are you without bending to their approval? These are terrifying questions, for they tear away the scaffolding of an identity that has long been constructed in response to others. But here is the deeper truth. This very disorientation is the birth of the self. For the self is not built on compliance, nor on performance, nor on the borrowed light of another. It is built in the quiet recognition of your own depths, the reconciliation of your inner opposites, the courage to embrace all that you are. Consider the myth of the phoenix, a bird consumed by fire, reduced to ash, only to be reborn from the very remains of its destruction. This is not a story of comfort. It is a story of transformation. The narcissist may have set fire to the structures you thought defined you. They may have burned away illusions of safety, love, and control. But from those ashes, something truer can rise, not the persona, not the mask, but the essence of your being. This is individuation. This is the long, winding journey toward wholeness. Individuation does not mean perfection. It does not mean becoming untouchable or free from pain. It means becoming real, conscious whole. It means recognizing both your light and your shadow, both your strength and your vulnerability, both your longing and your defiance. It means no longer projecting your unlived life onto others, no longer allowing them to dictate the meaning of your existence. And perhaps most profoundly, it means you can now see the narcissist for what they are, not a god, not a monster, but a human being trapped in their own unconsciousness, unable to face themselves. This does not excuse them, but it releases you from their spell. And here you begin to touch the possibility of forgiveness. Not the shallow forgiveness that denies harm, not the false forgiveness that keeps you bound, but the deeper kind, the forgiveness that comes when you no longer need them to be different in order for you to be free. You see their wounds, their blindness, their desperate attempts to escape their own shadow, and you recognize that you too carry shadows of your own. This recognition does not invite reconciliation, it invites release. For forgiveness at its truest is not about them, it is about you. It is about cutting the cord of projection and reclaiming the fragments of your own soul. You may find that others do not understand this journey. They may urge you to move on quickly, to forget, to dismiss what happened as if it were nothing. But you know that this wound is sacred. You know that what you endured has carved a depth in you that cannot be denied. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. You are living that truth. And though you may not yet feel the fullness of its gift, you are already becoming more conscious, more awake, more alive. So, take a breath now as if you are inhaling your own presence back into your body. Feel the ground beneath you. Feel the weight of your own existence anchoring you here in this moment. This is where freedom begins, not in some distant future, not in the hope of their change, but here in your own awareness. You are not broken. You are becoming. You are not empty. You are awakening. And the very shadows that once enslaved you are now the doorway to your rebirth. There comes a moment after the storm has raged and the smoke has cleared when you realize the battle was never only with them. It was always with yourself, with the parts of you that longed for their approval, with the parts of you that accepted distortion as truth, with the parts of you that feared solitude more than entanglement. And this realization strikes with both pain and liberation. You cannot change them, but you can change your relationship to yourself. This is the threshold where suffering begins to transmute into awakening. At first, the temptation will be to harden, to say, "I will never trust again. I will never open my heart again. I will never be deceived again." This is the instinct of the wounded soul, the armor built to prevent further harm. But if you stay here, you become your own jailer. You protect yourself from pain, yes, but you also protect yourself from love. Jung would remind you that the goal is not to become invulnerable, but to become whole. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting away what is fragile, but by embracing it consciously, by holding both your strength and your tenderness without shame. Think of the way a tree grows. When lightning strikes and scars its trunk, the tree does not cut off the wounded part. It grows around it, incorporating the scar into its living form. The wound becomes part of its strength, the mark of survival written into its very body. So it is with you. The scars of manipulation, betrayal, and confusion do not disappear. They become part of your story. They shape the texture of your soul. And if you allow it, they become the very lines through which wisdom flows. You may begin to notice subtle shifts within yourself. Where once you tolerated lies, now you feel a tightening in your chest when words and actions do not align. Where once you silenced your needs, now you feel a stirring in your throat, a desire to speak even if your voice trembles. Where once you merged too easily with another, now you feel the contours of your own boundaries, invisible yet real, like the pulse of life in your skin. These are not small shifts. They are signs that you are beginning to inhabit yourself more fully. And with this inhabiting comes a strange new vision. You begin to see others differently. You recognize the masks they wear, the personas they polish for the world. You sense the hidden shadows lurking beneath their charm. This perception is not cynicism. It is clarity. You no longer confuse the mask for the soul. You no longer mistake flattery for love. You see both the light and the darkness in others because you have begun to see both within yourself. This clarity, however, brings responsibility. For once you awaken to projection, you cannot remain innocent. You must ask, how am I projecting onto them? Where do I expect them to carry what I refuse to face in myself? Where do I idealize? Where do I demonize? Where do I blur the line between what is mine and what is theirs? This self-questioning is not easy. It strips away illusions, exposes your own complicity, confronts you with uncomfortable truths. But it is also the very work of individuation. To reclaim your projections is to reclaim your soul. In dreams, this inner work often appears as encounters with figures of shadow and light. You may dream of being chased only to discover that the pursuer is a part of you. You may dream of a lover who both fascinates and terrifies, embodying qualities you have disowned. These dream figures are not random. They are the language of the unconscious, revealing the aspects of yourself waiting to be integrated. To engage them, to listen, to feel, to dialogue within the depths of your own psyche is to participate in the great mystery Jung called the self. The self is not the ego. It is not the identity you present to the world, nor the story you tell yourself of who you are. The self is larger, deeper, encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious, both the personal and the archetypal. It is the totality of your being, the divine image within the center that holds. The narcissist could not see this in themselves, and so they could not see it in you. But you are not condemned to the same blindness. Through suffering, you have been brought to the threshold of the self. Through betrayal, you have been invited into the mystery of your own wholeness. And yet the path is never without danger. There is always the risk of swinging to extremes, of demonizing them completely while refusing to see your own shadow, or of drowning in self-blame while excusing their harm. The challenge is to hold the tension of opposites, to see clearly their manipulation and cruelty while also seeing their humanity. To hold compassion without collapsing into submission. To hold anger without hardening into bitterness. Jung called this the transcendent function, the capacity to live in paradox until a new synthesis emerges. This synthesis often feels less like an idea and more like a subtle shift in being. One day you realize you no longer crave their approval. One day you notice that their voice in your head has grown faint. One day you feel the quiet power of being able to walk away without needing them to understand why. These are the signs that individuation is taking root. You are no longer defined by their shadow. You are standing in the light of your own self. And in that light, something miraculous happens. The very qualities you once sought in them, the confidence, the strength, the allure, begin to awaken within you. What you admired was never truly theirs. It was always a projection of your own unrealized potential. By withdrawing the projection, by reclaiming what you had disowned, you become more whole. You discover that you are capable of a love that does not manipulate, of a power that does not dominate, of a presence that does not vanish when challenged. Perhaps in this moment you feel both grief and relief. Grief because you see how long you lived in illusion. Relief because you see that you are no longer bound. Allow both to flow through you. They are the twin currents of transformation. They wash away what was false and nourish what is true. So do not fear the scars you carry. They are the initiation marks of your soul. They show that you have walked through fire and lived. They show that you are no longer asleep. They show that you are capable of facing darkness and not turning away. This is the beginning of wisdom. This is the dawn of freedom. There is a quiet after the storm, but it is not the quiet of emptiness. It is the quiet of beginning again. You may feel strange at first, as if the world looks both unfamiliar and yet more vivid than before. You have spent so long bound by someone else's gravity that to stand in your own orbit feels disorienting. This is the stage where healing takes root, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. The narcissist's shadow no longer consumes you. What remains is the work of integrating your own. Integration is not a single event. It is a rhythm, a dance between light and dark, between what you know of yourself and what you are still discovering. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming the self, not the ego's inflated image, but the wholeness that holds every contradiction. This means you do not reject the shadow. You do not pretend it does not exist. Instead, you turn toward it, acknowledging its voice, feeling its presence, letting it teach you. For what you fear most often hides what you need most. Perhaps you fear your anger, believing it makes you dangerous or unlovable. But anger, when integrated, becomes clarity, the power to say yes or no with integrity. Perhaps you fear your vulnerability, believing it makes you weak. Yet vulnerability, when embraced, becomes intimacy, the bridge that allows true connection. Perhaps you fear your desire for recognition, believing it is selfish. Yet that desire, when seen honestly, becomes the fire that fuels creativity, the courage to step into the world as you are. This is how the shadow, once your enemy, becomes your ally. And as you integrate, something profound shifts in your relationships. You no longer unconsciously seek someone to carry your disowned parts. You no longer project your unlived life onto others. You no longer hand your power away in exchange for the illusion of love. Instead, you begin to meet others as they are, not as saviors, not as demons, but as fellow travelers carrying their own shadows. This recognition is the foundation of authentic connection. It is not about perfection. It is about presence. But the journey does not end with relationships. It deepens into your own soul. Jung often spoke of dreams as the royal road to the unconscious. Pay attention to what arises in your sleep now after the storm. Perhaps you dream of walking through ruined cities only to find a garden blooming among the rubble. Perhaps you dream of facing figures who once terrified you, but now stand silently waiting for your acknowledgement. These are not random images. They are the language of your psyche, showing you how far you have come, revealing what is ready to be integrated next. The unconscious is vast, and within it live not only personal wounds, but archetypal figures, the great patterns of human experience. Among them the shadow, yes, but also the wise old man, the great mother, the child, the hero, the trickster. These figures arise when you are ready to meet them, guiding you toward wholeness. They may appear in dreams and fantasies, even in the subtle imaginations that arise while awake. To engage them is to dialogue with the depths of your being. To ignore them is to remain half alive. Through these encounters, you may begin to sense the presence of something larger than yourself, the self, that mysterious center which holds the totality of who you are. Jung sometimes described it as an inner God image, the spark of the divine in the human psyche. You might feel it as a quiet strength, an inner compass, a flame that neither manipulation nor betrayal could extinguish. The narcissist could not touch it because it does not belong to them. It is yours, and it has always been there waiting for you to return. To live from this center is to move differently in the world. You no longer collapse when others disapprove. You no longer chase illusions of love. You no longer shrink to fit someone else's shadow. Instead, you walk with a kind of rootedness, a dignity that does not need to be proven. This is not arrogance, it is authenticity, and authenticity has a power far greater than manipulation. For manipulation seeks to control, while authenticity simply is. It radiates, it invites, it frees. But remember, authenticity does not mean ease. To live from the self often means walking against the current of collective expectation. The world thrives on masks, on personas, on illusions of certainty. To refuse those illusions may bring loneliness, misunderstanding, even rejection. Yet it is the only path that leads to true life. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That privilege is also a burden, for it asks everything of you. But in giving everything, you receive yourself. And so, you may notice that the narcissist, once a source of pain, has become strangely irrelevant. They remain who they are, perhaps still ensnared in their illusions, perhaps still projecting their shadow onto the next willing soul. But you no longer revolve around them. You no longer carry their darkness as your own. You no longer confuse their voice with your truth. They are simply another figure in the vast drama of the psyche, a shadowed teacher, an unwitting initiator, a catalyst for your awakening. This realization brings with it a final paradox: gratitude. Not the naive gratitude that excuses harm, but the mature gratitude that recognizes the hidden gift within suffering. Without them, you might never have confronted your shadow. Without them, you might never have awakened to the self. Without them, you might never have discovered the strength, the clarity, the wholeness that is now taking root in you. Their darkness revealed your light. Their manipulation revealed your freedom. Their emptiness revealed your soul. So here you stand, scarred but not broken, wounded but not defeated, humbled yet more whole. You have walked through fire, and what has burned away was never truly you. What remains is truer, deeper, more resilient. This is the gift of individuation. This is the rebirth that comes only after descent.
There is a kind of beauty that doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't wear bright colors or draw attention with theatrics. It does not beg to be admired, nor does it collapse when unrecognized. It is a beauty that moves like a whisper through the soul, not because it is weak, but because it is beyond the need to shout. This is the beauty of a mature woman who has suffered, who has listened, who has descended into herself so deeply that she no longer fears the silence inside her. She doesn't need to be understood, and that is precisely what makes her magnetic. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. A spiritually awakened woman has claimed that privilege not as a gift handed to her by the world, but as something she ripped from the illusions of identity she once wore. She does not glitter. She glows, and that glow comes from one source she has faced herself and lived to tell the tale. She has danced with her own shadow in the dark caverns of the unconscious, and when she returned, she brought back something no one else could give her herself. You cannot buy what she carries. You cannot imitate it. You can only recognize it when your own soul is ready to stop pretending. She is not youthful in the way the world worships youth, but she is radiant in the way the soul longs to be seen. Her face may carry lines, but each one is a scripture of something real. Sorrow endured, laughter released, grace chosen. Her body may no longer meet society's fantasies, but it is a temple of memory and intuition of storms weathered and miracles survived. She walks differently because she carries the weight of wisdom, and wisdom is never light. Her gaze cuts through illusion, not because she wishes to harm, but because she no longer plays the game. She sees the persona, the masks, the performance, and waits to see who will drop theirs first. She doesn't seduce, she awakens. She is not chasing love. She is love shaped through fire. What makes her spiritually attractive is not just her strength, but the depth of her surrender. She has stopped trying to control the river and has learned to flow with it, not because she gave up, but because she finally understood what is real can never be lost. What is true can never be forced, and what is sacred never needs to demand attention, it simply commands presence. The mature woman has faced the death of her old self, not once, but many times. And each time she buried a layer of identity that was never truly hers. The obedient daughter, the pleasing lover, the agreeable friend, the performer, the rescuer, the good girl. She buried them all, not out of bitterness, but out of devotion to the truth. Carl Jung spoke of the process of individuation, a long, painful, often isolating journey toward becoming whole. And this woman has walked that path. She has held herself in the middle of the night when no one called. She has questioned everything she was taught to believe. She has screamed in silence when the world told her to smile. And in those dark places, something divine emerged. Not perfection, not enlightenment, but integration. She did not transcend her pain, she made a home for it. She did not eliminate her flaws, she wove them into her power. She did not become what others needed, she became what her soul demanded. And in doing so, she became whole. Wholeness is not the absence of brokenness, it is the sacred weaving of every fragmented piece into something honest, beautiful, and awake. This woman's energy does not beg to be loved. It dares you to meet her in truth. It is not loud, but it is unshakable. It is not soft in the way people romanticize femininity. It is soft like the eye of a hurricane, still but surrounded by storms. Her softness is not submission. It is restraint. It is discipline. It is the power to choose silence over reaction, presence over panic, patience over drama. She is not difficult. She is discerning. She is not distant. She is discerning where to place her energy. She is not hard to love. She simply refuses to water herself down to be consumed by those who cannot hold depth. And that is the very essence of her spiritual attractiveness. She doesn't offer herself to be devoured. She offers herself to be witnessed, mirrored, honored. She wants a connection, yes, but only if it is rooted in presence, not projection. She wants intimacy, but not the kind that clings, the kind that liberates, the kind that sees, holds, and doesn't try to fix or possess. Because she has already rescued herself, and she knows now anything less than truth is betrayal. Anything less than soul is noise. What she desires is not power over others, but mastery over herself. She does not compete. She transcends. She does not argue with small minds. She simply exits. She does not convince anyone of her worth, because her worth is not up for negotiation. She knows what she brings to the table, and if you cannot see it, she will eat alone. Not from ego, from integrity, and that integrity is what gives her such depth. She is not spiritual because she speaks in affirmations or practices rituals. She is spiritual because she lives in alignment with the sacred. She listens when her body says no. She speaks when silence would be betrayal. She walks away when her presence is no longer honored, and she stays only when staying is a choice, not an obligation. That is what makes her different. That is what makes her magnetic. She is not here to impress. She is here to embody. And embodiment is rare in a world addicted to image. She is what happens when a woman stops running from herself and starts returning. Again and again. Until she becomes a home no storm can shake. There is something profoundly disarming about a woman who no longer needs the world to love her. She has walked through enough seasons of rejection, misunderstanding, and quiet disappointments to know that most love offered is a mirror of the lover's own wounds. And she does not resent this. She simply refuses to be consumed by it. She does not confuse being chosen with being valued. She does not chase affection or play the role of muse to validate her existence. She does not mold herself to become what others want. She has retired from the exhausting theater of performative femininity. What she embodies now is not a role, but a revelation, a living presence shaped by years of letting go, stripping away and surrendering to the deepest truth within her. When Carl Jung spoke of the self, he was speaking of the integration of the conscious and unconscious, the union of opposites, the sacred becoming of one's true being. This woman has touched that place, not because she sought enlightenment, but because she was brave enough to sit in her own darkness without trying to escape it. Her spirituality is not curated. It is carved. Through heartbreak, through failure, through the collapse of who she thought she was supposed to be. Her path was not gentle, it was necessary. Life didn't whisper her into awareness. It broke her open, and from those ruptures she emerged not as someone new, but as someone real. Her depth is not decorative. It was earned in the trenches of inner war, and that war was never against the world, it was against the false self she once mistook for truth. She no longer denies her rage, her grief, her hunger, her need for solitude. She no longer suppresses the chaos inside her to keep the peace outside her. She has learned the hard way peace that demands your silence is violence. So now she speaks, not to be heard, but to honor what is true. Her voice is not loud, it is grounded. When she speaks, something ancient stirs in those who listen. Because it is not opinion that comes through her lips, it is knowing. And knowing is what makes her dangerous in a world built on denial. There is no part of herself she has not questioned, no belief too sacred to re-examine, no identity too stable to dismantle. She has faced the void that comes when the ego dissolves, and nothing familiar remains. That terrifying in-between space where you are no longer who you were, and not yet who you're becoming. This liminal realm Jung called the night sea journey, a descent into the unconscious where the old self dies and the new self is born through integration. She did not fight her way through it, she surrendered. She let herself fall apart so that she could see what was unbreakable. And what remained was not a woman who needed saving, it was a woman who had become her own anchor. That anchor is not made of certainty. It is made of presence. And presence is her superpower. In a world obsessed with speed, distraction, and surface, she slows down. She listens. She notices. She feels everything. Not because it's easy, but because it's real, and realness is her currency. If it isn't honest, she doesn't want it. If it isn't so, she lets it go. Her standards are not high, they are holy. Men who meet her will either awaken or flee. Because she does not offer comfort, she offers reflection. And most people do not want to be seen. They want to be adored. They want fantasy, not truth. But she is truth in human form, and truth burns away pretense. She is not a dream to be chased. She is a mirror that asks, are you ready to face yourself? Can you hold a woman who holds herself? Can you love someone who no longer needs your love to survive? If not, walk away. Because this woman is no longer available for half-truths, almosts, and maybes. She is not interested in being your lesson. She is interested in being your equal. And if you cannot meet her there, she will not beg. Not because she is cold, but because she is clear. Clarity is her protection. Boundaries are her love. She doesn't need to convince anyone of her worth. She simply lives it, and that is what makes her untouchable, not invulnerable, but sovereign. She has cried all the tears. She has asked all the questions, and she has made one sacred vow to herself. Never again will I abandon my soul to belong. She doesn't look for signs. She listens to her intuition. She doesn't need to predict the future. She trusts her energy. She knows when a room is wrong. She knows when a smile is false. She knows when a connection is real. She doesn't cling to possibilities. She reads the vibration beneath the words, the frequency behind the form. This is not paranoia. It is perception. It is the wisdom that comes when you stop romanticizing red flags, when you stop gaslighting your own gut, when you start honoring what your body has always known. She has learned the soul speaks in whispers, and to hear it, you must be willing to go still. She has gone still. She has sat in the silence until it sang. She has sat with herself long enough to realize that loneliness is not the enemy. Loneliness was the doorway. Through it she met her truest self. Through it she remembered who she was before the world told her who to be. Now solitude is no longer punishment. It is sanctuary. It is how she returns to herself when the world grows loud. The spiritually attractive, mature woman does not need to be admired. She needs to be respected, not for her beauty, but for her journey, for the invisible work she's done, for the nights she held herself in pieces, for the years she built herself from silence, for the courage it takes to become who you really are in a world that profits off your confusion. She is not intimidating. She is simply unapologetic. She no longer bends to avoid being too much. She no longer shrinks to make others feel comfortable. Her truth is not loud, but it is unmovable. And that truth is not a weapon. It is a light. Not everyone can handle it, but those who can will never forget her, because when you meet a woman who has become herself, you are changed, not because of what she gives you, but because of what she awakens in you. She doesn't just love, she ignites. She doesn't just connect, she calls forth. Her presence is not a promise, it is a portal. And if you dare to step through it, you may just meet someone you forgot long ago yourself. There is a stillness inside her that makes noise feel like chaos. You cannot bring drama to her doorstep and expect her to open the door. She will watch your storm unfold, but she will not be swept into it. That's not indifference. It's self-respect born from sacred experience. She has lived through enough inner warfare to know what peace truly costs, and she will not trade it for temporary passion or fleeting attention. In her presence, you may feel yourself become more honest, not because she demands it, but because your soul remembers what it feels like to be seen without pretense. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious longs to become conscious, and this woman, by her very nature, becomes a catalyst for that transformation. She doesn't try to awaken you. She simply exists so fully in her own awakening that your dormant self stirs in response. She is not a teacher in the traditional sense. She doesn't need to explain. Her life is her lesson. Her boundaries are her syllabus. Her energy is her doctrine. She has become a living embodiment of truth, not by speaking it, but by being it. And in a world addicted to illusion that makes her revolutionary, you may try to categorize her name, contain her, but you will fail. She is not meant to be understood by logic alone. She is poetry, not prose. You don't analyze her, you feel her. And what you feel may unsettle you. Because she doesn't meet your expectations, she mirrors your capacity. If you are shallow, you will think her distant. If you are wounded, you may call her cruel. But if you are ready, truly ready, you will feel the invitation hidden in her presence. The invitation to rise, to dissolve, to become. Because she has become the kind of woman who no longer lives in reaction to the world, but in response to her own inner compass. That compass is not influenced by trends, roles, or fears. It is aligned with the deeper current that flows beneath all things. The archetypal feminine that Jung explored, the wise woman, the mystic, the soul guide, lives in her, not as an idea, but as a force. You do not date this kind of woman. You enter her orbit, and if you are fortunate, you remain there not through possession, but through presence. Not through pursuit, but through resonance. She doesn't waste her energy proving her worth. She already knows it. She doesn't overshare, overgive, or overstay. She has made peace with being misunderstood, because she has come to understand herself, and when a woman reaches that level of self-awareness, the entire game changes. The rules no longer apply. The roles fall apart. The masks burn in the fire of her becoming. She doesn't engage in battles that drain her. She doesn't argue for her limitations. She simply withdraws, not to punish, but to preserve, not to retreat, but to return inward. That is where she refuels. That is where she listens. That is where she remembers. The world may call her selfish, but the truth is, she has learned that self-abandonment is the ultimate betrayal. She will not leave herself again, not for love, not for family, not for approval. She knows now that true love begins within, that unless a connection honors the self, it is not love, it is attachment, and attachment is not intimacy. It is fear dressed in affection. She no longer confuses the two. Her heart is open but not unguarded. Her love is deep but not desperate. This woman has stopped apologizing for her needs. She no longer edits her truth to be digestible. She no longer hides her fire to avoid burning others. She has learned that her intensity is not a flaw. It is a compass. It points toward what matters. And what matters to her now is realness, sacredness, soul. She can sit in silence without reaching for distraction. She can walk away from chaos without looking back. She can end a relationship not because it was all bad, but because it no longer honors her becoming. That kind of clarity is not common, because it comes at a cost. She had to unlearn everything that taught her to shrink. She had to heal the wound that told her she was only lovable if she was convenient. She had to face the guilt of outgrowing those she once bled for. She had to forgive herself for the years she spent betraying her own voice. And in doing so, she became something rare. A woman who is not afraid to be alone. A woman who would rather wait in solitude than settle in illusion. A woman who would rather be true than be liked. To be in her presence is to be invited into a new way of relating. One that is not built on performance, seduction, or dependency, but on mutual respect, shared presence, and deep soul recognition. She does not want you to save her. She wants you to see her. She does not want you to complete her. She wants you to meet her fully, vulnerably, honestly. And if you cannot, she will not fight to keep you, because she is no longer willing to sacrifice her evolution for connection. She does not measure the success of a relationship by how long it lasts, but by how much truth it holds. If the connection deepens her, it is sacred. If it dims her, it is done. That discernment is not cruelty, it is devotion. Devotion to the path, devotion to the self, devotion to the divine that lives within her. She does not chase the light, she walks with the darkness, and in doing so she becomes luminous from within. Not the glow of naivete, but the radiance of one who has integrated her shadow. That is what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And she has done exactly that. You cannot manufacture this kind of woman. You cannot rush her becoming. She is not the product of self-help books or weekend retreats. She is the result of seasons, of shedding skins, of sacred endings. She was not built, she was born through undoing. And what emerged from the undoing was not a woman trying to be spiritual, but a woman who had no choice but to remember what she was before the world taught her to forget. Her soul had to erupt through the ruins of who she was told to be. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't graceful, it wasn't aesthetic, it was raw, ugly, holy. She broke not because she was weak, but because the life she built was too small for the truth that lived inside her. So she let it all collapse. The image, the career, the relationships, the identities. She let them fall so that she could hear what whispered beneath it all. And what whispered was this: you were never here to play small. You were never here to belong to anything but the vastness of your own becoming. She no longer fits into the binary. She is not either soft or strong. She is both and neither. She is not nurturing or fierce. She is a storm wrapped in skin. She is the feminine redefined not as docility but as presence that pierces through illusion. Her softness is not submission, it is resilience tempered by grace. Her power is not aggression, it is clarity rooted in silence. She doesn't enter a room looking for attention. She is attention, not in ego but in essence. People feel her before they see her. They don't understand why, but they feel different in her presence. Because she is not engaging from the surface. She sees through you. She hears what you don't say. She notices what you avoid. And she loves you there, not with a savior's hunger, but with a soul's compassion. She does not try to fix you. She reflects you. And most are not ready for that kind of love. Because it demands you face yourself. Not for her, but for you. That is the sacred confrontation she offers. She has stopped asking for permission from the world, from men, from society, from her own inner critic. She no longer seeks validation for her way of living, loving, healing, or evolving. She has dethroned external authority and replaced it with inner alignment. Jung taught that the process of individuation required the death of the persona, that mask we wear to survive, to belong, to be seen. She has ripped off that mask again and again until there is nothing left but essence. And essence does not need permission. It simply is. It breathes. It moves. It speaks in dreams, symbols, synchronicities. And she listens. She builds her life not on strategy, but on synchronicity. She moves by intuition. She trusts the invisible. She is guided not by logic alone, but by the deeper pull of something beyond thought. Something that lives in the body, in the gut, in the womb, in the dreamscape of her unconscious. She no longer explains this to others. If you understand, you understand. If not, she smiles and moves on. Not out of arrogance, but because explaining herself would be a betrayal of the magic she now calls home. The world doesn't know what to do with a woman like this. She cannot be marketed to manipulated or made dependent. She does not follow trends, she sets her own rhythm. She is not impressed by status symbols or wealth. She sees through it. She knows what matters. Presence, integrity, soul. She will walk away from anything that lacks these, not because she's demanding, but because she knows the cost of staying where her soul is starving. She's done it before, and she's not doing it again. Her time is sacred now. Her energy is currency. Her attention is holy. If you have access to her, it's not by accident. It's because your energy aligns. And if it stops aligning, she will not force it. She does not cling. She does not control. She lets go with grace. Because she trusts that what is real never leaves, and what leaves was never real. That is not coldness. That is spiritual maturity. That is emotional sovereignty. That is the wisdom born from sitting alone in rooms where love used to live and still choosing to stay true to herself. She has learned that the greatest romance is not found in another, but in returning to herself again and again through every heartbreak. She no longer needs to be pursued to feel worthy. She no longer needs to be praised to feel beautiful. She no longer needs to be needed to feel alive. She is not lonely, she is full. Of silence, of spirit, of knowing. And from that fullness, she chooses. She loves freely, fiercely, but never foolishly. Her love is not a rescue mission. Her love is not self-sacrifice. Her love is not a transaction. Her love is a force, and forces do not beg. They simply are. If you are not ready, you will misread her. You will think she is guarded cold, impossible to reach. But she is not unreachable. She is only unwilling to lower her frequency to be understood by minds that have not yet met their own soul. She is not here to be decoded. She is here to be respected, honored, met. She is not better than anyone, she is just finally herself. And that is what makes her sacred. She is not the goal. She is the reminder of what you can become, if you dare to go where she has gone. There is no ceremony for the kind of initiation she has passed through. No applause, no audience. Only the quiet tearing away of everything false. The long nights where no one saw her become. The days she smiled in public while dying in private. The slow unraveling of a life built on pleasing others. And the even slower process of learning to live for herself. This is not a woman who became powerful through titles or achievements. This is a woman who became powerful by being broken and choosing to rebuild from truth. The world sees her now and whispers, she is different, but they do not know what that difference cost. She has bled in places no one talks about. She has carried grief like a second skin. She has doubted her worth, questioned her sanity, and begged the universe for clarity, but she never gave up. She descended into herself not to escape the world, but to finally meet it from a place of wholeness. And now she walks with a kind of sacred defiance, not against the world, but against the lies that once lived inside her. She is not angry. She is awake. Her spiritual attractiveness is not a performance, it is presence. The kind of presence that unsettles illusions and makes you want to become more honest just by standing near her. She doesn't chase enlightenment. She embodies it. Not the kind sold in workshops or framed in Instagram quotes, but the kind that is born in the rubble. The kind that tastes like ashes before it becomes light. She is not selling transcendence. She is offering integration. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." She has done that, and it shows, not in her clothes or her speech, but in her energy, in the way she walks into a room and doesn't shrink, in the way she holds eye contact like she has nothing to hide, in the way her silence says more than most people's words. You can feel her, even when she says nothing, especially then, because silence is her temple. And from that temple she watches not to judge, but to understand. Not to manipulate, but to remember. She remembers you before you even speak. Not who you pretend to be, but who you were before the world made you forget. And perhaps that's what makes her so unforgettable. She sees you, the real you, beneath the armor, the ego, the performance. She sees the boy in the man, the lost in the strong, the longing behind the charm. She doesn't judge it, she honors it, but she will not be fooled by it. She will not cater to your wounds to avoid her own. She has done too much inner work to collapse into old patterns. If you project, she will return the mirror. If you hide, she will not chase. If you lie, she will leave. Not to punish, but to protect her path. She is not here to teach you lessons, but you will learn. You will learn that love does not have to be loud to be thunderous. That depth does not scream, it hums. That truth does not beg, it arrives. And when it arrives in the form of a woman like her, you will either rise to meet her or fall away. There is no middle ground with someone who no longer lives in halves. She is whole, and wholeness, once touched, makes everything less feel unbearable. She is not what the world tells you to want, but everything your soul is starving for. She is not the woman who fits into your life. She is the woman who asks if your life fits truth. She will not soothe your ego. She will awaken your essence. She will not entertain your chaos. She will ask if you're ready to meet your calm. And if you are, she will open. Not all at once, but like a temple that only reveals its secrets when you've proven you can handle the silence inside. This is not romance. This is reverence. This is not flirtation. This is initiation. She is not the prize. She is the path back to yourself, to the masculine that is no longer afraid to be vulnerable, to the soul that no longer needs armor, to the human who no longer confuses control with love. If you can walk with her, not in front, not behind, but beside you, will taste a love that does not bind, but liberates. A love that does not diminish, but expands. A love that doesn't complete you but reminds you that you were never broken. So now, ask yourself, not, do you want her? But are you ready for what she represents? Because she is not here to play the game. She is here to shift it, to bring depth back to a world lost in surfaces, to bring soul back to a love lost in ego, to bring reverence back to the feminine and the masculine alike. She doesn't care if you like her. She cares if you see her, not the body, not the role, but the being. If you can see her there beneath it all, you may glimpse something ancient, something sacred, something that doesn't age, doesn't die, doesn't perform. You may glimpse the soul that lives behind her eyes, and if you do, you won't walk away the same. Not because she changed you, but because she reminded you of what you always were beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the pretending. She reminded you that truth is magnetic, that depth is divine, that the feminine once reclaimed is the most radiant force on earth. And that is what makes a mature woman spiritually attractive. She is not trying to attract you. She is becoming herself, and that is the most attractive thing anyone can do.
What if the love you've been taught to seek is not love at all, but a shield, a veil over something more frightening than heartbreak, the silence inside you when no one is there to fill it? You call it longing, connection, partnership. But what if it is simply the fear of meeting yourself without distractions? What if every search for the one has been a clever avoidance of the truth that there is no one who can live your life for you? You can feel it when the noise fades, when the phone goes silent, the house is still, and your own breathing is the loudest thing in the room. That unease, that subtle ache in the chest, is not loneliness. It is your soul reminding you that you have been absent from yourself, and it asks the one question you spend years avoiding: whose life have you been living? Jung once invited us to imagine the end. Not the romantic kind, not the poetic fade to black, but the real one, your body still, your mind loosening its grip on time, the air heavier than it has ever been. In that final quiet, there is a whisper, one you cannot ignore. Did you live as you, or as the echo of someone else's desire? From the moment you were old enough to understand stories, they gave you the script. Find someone, be chosen, build together, share a bed until your last day. It sounds noble, almost holy. It sounds like safety, but no one tells you what dies along the way. The dreams you set aside for the relationship, the truths you don't speak to keep the peace, the edges you sand down until your own reflection no longer recognizes you. Jung understood that the path toward becoming yourself, what he called individuation, demands a solitude most people cannot bear. Not because solitude is inherently cruel, but because it forces you to face the shadow you've been hiding from. That side of you that doesn't smile for the photos, that refuses to compromise when your spirit knows better, that remembers who you were before you learned to perform. Society calls such people selfish. It tells them no one can be happy alone. It repeats the gospel of the couple that the only wholeness worth having is the one you find in another's arms. But what if that is not truth? What if the deeper betrayal is abandoning yourself in order to be loved? This is not a declaration against love. It is a call to choose the only love that can survive all others, the love of your own becoming, the kind that is willing to walk into deserts without a guide, without a hand to hold, because the truth you're after cannot be found in company. You were taught that being single is a pause, an incomplete state waiting to be filled, that the absence of a partner is a flaw, a deficiency, a sign that something in you is broken. But maybe the opposite is true. Maybe it is the need to attach to immediately bind yourself to another that signals a wound covered with the soft fabric of romance, but still open, still unhealed. Jung saw that most people do not love, they cling. They use the other as a mirror they can control, a way to avoid the unpredictability of meeting their own depths. They confuse possession with intimacy, dependence with devotion. And slowly, they trade their individuality for the comfort of not having to face themselves in the raw. It begins so subtly you barely notice. You adjust a belief so you don't argue. You swallow a desire so you don't disrupt. You change a habit and call it maturity. But somewhere in that process, the voice inside you, the one that knows your real name, starts to fade. And you wake one day to find you have been replaced by a persona, a socially acceptable character built to keep love intact, even at the expense of your truth. Jung did not despise love. He despised the surrender of the inner fire that makes you unique. Romantic ideals ask for fusion, for two to become one. But in that merging, the creative chaos, the raw material of the soul, can vanish, and what remains is a quiet, well-decorated cage. Being alone demands courage because it removes every excuse. There is no one to blame for your stagnation, no one to soothe you when your own shadow rises, no distraction from the raw fact of your existence. This is why so many rush into relationships not out of joy, but out of the terror of unmediated self-awareness. Jung warned of the projections that keep us blind. Everything we deny in ourselves, we seek in another. Our tenderness, our ambition, our daring handed over, outsourced, so we can feel them safely at a distance. But in doing so, we fracture. We become dependent on someone else to carry pieces of us that we refuse to claim. True love does not require you to erase yourself. It does not demand the dimming of your light to protect someone's comfort. The love Jung valued began not in finding a match, but in finding the courage to live without one until you are so complete within yourself that no one's presence can become your crutch. You may feel the pull of that truth even now, a restlessness beneath the skin, a sense that the life you are living was built more for approval than for authenticity. You may have noticed that in moments of genuine solitude, no phone, no background noise, no planned escape, your mind begins to stir differently. Thoughts deepen, memories surface, your shadow comes to sit beside you. And in that moment, you stand on the edge of the most important choice you will ever make. Will you step into yourself, or will you reach again for the nearest distraction? Solitude is not a punishment. It is the ground on which your real self grows roots. It is the silence in which your inner voice stops whispering and begins to speak. It is the crucible in which you are no longer half of something, but whole on your own. To stand there willingly is to break a spell, the spell of cultural hypnosis that tells you belonging is more important than being. To stay there long enough is to realize that the emptiness you feared was never emptiness at all. It was space for you to unfold, unhurried, unfiltered, unapproved. And here is the paradox: once you have lived that way, once you have known yourself at that depth, you will no longer seek a partner to complete you. You may choose love again, but not because you need it. You will love as a whole being, not a half. And that, Jung would say, is the only love worth giving or receiving. The journey there is not glamorous. It does not look good on social media. It will not be met with applause, but it will be the truest thing you ever do. And so, you stand before the threshold, aware that stepping through means shedding more than relationships. It means dismantling identities you've worn for years, the ones that made you palatable, the ones that made you acceptable, the ones that convinced you that safety was the highest form of living. You may think the first thing you will lose in solitude is love, but it's not. The first thing you lose is the constant feedback loop that tells you who you are. The nods of approval, the quiet affirmations, the little corrections that shape you subtly every day. And without them, you feel unmoored, like a boat cut from its dock, drifting into open water where the horizon is too far to see. Most people turn back here. The silence feels too wide. The absence of reflection feels like erasure. But Jung knew this is where you begin to see the persona for what it is, that carefully constructed mask designed to win belonging. It is the you that you've shown to lovers, friends, employers, strangers, a version optimized for acceptance, not truth. And when solitude removes the audience, the mask begins to dissolve. What's left beneath it is unsettling at first. You will meet impulses you've ignored, dreams you abandoned, griefs you postponed. Your shadow will step out of the dark, not as a monster, but as the parts of you exiled by your own self-image. You'll feel its weight. You'll see its scars. You'll hear it ask why you chose to hide it in order to be loved. The shadow does not come to destroy you, it comes to complete you. But most people treat it like an intruder, barricading themselves behind distractions and relationships, as if being alone with these truths would be unbearable. Jung saw that those who cannot face their own shadow are destined to project it, seeing in others the flaws, desires, and fears they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. It is why lovers idealize each other in the beginning and resent each other in the end. The qualities they adored were their own disowned treasures. The traits they now hate are their own denied darkness. Solitude strips away that projection. There is no one to carry your unlived life for you, no one to receive your misplaced blame. In the mirror of solitude, every feature is yours, every strength, every failure, every longing. At first, this self-confrontation feels like loss, the loss of the comforting illusion that someone else will make sense of you. But then something begins to shift. In the stillness, your attention turns inward, and you discover there is a dialogue happening within you that is richer than any conversation you've had out there. It is the dialogue between your conscious mind and the vast sea of the unconscious, a territory Jung devoted his life to exploring. Dreams rise from that depth, bringing images and symbols that bypass logic and speak in the language of the soul. They are not mere fantasies, but messages, invitations to reclaim parts of yourself you have forgotten. In them, you may see figures who frighten you, landscapes that feel strangely familiar, or encounters that seem impossible. Jung would say these are aspects of your psyche, each carrying a piece of the self you have yet to integrate. Here, in this inner terrain, you begin to notice the anima or animus, the inner counterpart to your outer identity. If you live as a man, you meet the feminine within intuition, receptivity, emotional depth. If you live as a woman, you meet the masculine within will, clarity, decisive strength. You realize that much of your longing for the other has been a longing for this inner opposite, the part of you left undeveloped because you sought it in someone else's arms. The more you converse with these inner figures, the less desperate you feel for external completion. You see that relationships can enrich your life, but they cannot fill the places in you that you've abandoned. That is your work, your privilege, your liberation. And yet, there is a price. To live from this wholeness means you will be less controllable. You will no longer bend easily to fit another's ideal. You will be accused of being distant, unyielding, even arrogant, because you will not pretend to be less than you are for the sake of comfort, theirs or yours. But this is where the real paradox of freedom appears. Once you can be alone without fear, you are finally capable of love without chains, because you do not need the other to prop you up. You can see them clearly not as a savior or a threat, but as another complete being walking their own path. There is no grasping, no clinging, no covert bargain of, "I will give you what you want if you give me what I need." Love then becomes what it should have been all along, the meeting of two whole people, not the fusion of two halves. You begin to understand why Jung saw solitude not as an escape from love, but as its foundation. Without it, love collapses into dependency. With it, love becomes the free choice of one who could walk alone, but chooses to walk alongside without fear of losing themselves. And so the threshold remains before you, but now you see it differently. It is no longer the entrance to isolation, but the entrance to sovereignty. You are not giving up connection. You are reclaiming your ability to connect without self-erasure. You are not renouncing intimacy. You are rejecting the counterfeit intimacy that demands your identity as payment. The path beyond this point is not for everyone. Many will turn back to the warmth of belonging, even if it costs them their essence. But if you step forward, you step into the rare territory where a human being becomes indivisible, where your self is no longer negotiable. The air changes once you cross that unseen boundary. It is not louder or softer, not warmer or colder, but different, as if you've stepped outside the atmosphere you've been breathing your entire life. Here, no one tells you who to be. No one corrects your posture, your tone, your choices. It is intoxicating for a moment, then terrifying. Because when the outer scripts vanish, you discover just how dependent you were on them. You had thought you wanted freedom, but freedom comes with a silence that asks, if no one is watching, if no one approves or disapproves, who are you now? This is the place where the mind will try to invent new cages. It will seek new rules, new identities, new bonds to replace the old ones, anything to fill the raw openness. But if you resist that urge, if you can stand in that open space without running to clothe it in structure, something ancient begins to stir. Jung called it the self, the organizing center of the psyche, deeper than the ego, older than your conscious life. It is not the self you post online or protect in conversation. It is the pattern of wholeness you were born with, the blueprint that includes your shadow, your persona, your anima or animus, your conscious and unconscious mind. The ego resists this center because it cannot control it. The self moves according to laws the mind doesn't write. In solitude, the voice of the self grows clearer. It does not shout commands or dictate to-do lists. It sends impulses, images, a pull toward what nourishes you and a subtle recoil from what drains you. It asks you to honor the parts of yourself that the persona edited out. And the more you listen, the more you realize how much of your life was lived in service to an image rather than a truth. Relationships, when built on that image, become theaters. Each person plays their part, delivering lines rehearsed since childhood. One plays the caretaker, the other the dreamer. One plays the rescuer, the other the rescued. But when you begin to integrate the shadow and reclaim the self, you drop the role and the play begins to collapse. This is why deep inner work often disrupts existing bonds. You can no longer pretend to need rescuing if you have rescued yourself. You cannot keep performing gratitude for someone who puts up with your complexity when you have accepted it as part of your wholeness. You cannot be the fixed point for another's identity when you are in motion toward your own. And so, solitude becomes not just the absence of others, but the refusal to play roles that cost you your reality. You stop negotiating your essence. You stop explaining your hunger for silence. You stop apologizing for the ways your truth makes other people uncomfortable. At first, this can make you seem hard, even cold, because the warmth you used to project outward to keep the peace is now turned inward to keep yourself alive. But in time, this warmth changes quality. It is no longer the conditional warmth of someone who needs you to stay close. It is the steady heat of someone who can stand by the fire alone and therefore can share it freely without fear of losing it. In Jung's eyes, this is what individuation looks like, the slow and deliberate movement toward a psyche that is whole, integrated, not dependent on another to feel complete. It is the moment when love ceases to be an escape from yourself and becomes the meeting point of two sovereign beings. You might wonder why so few people reach this place. The truth is, the path is lined with losses that feel, for a time, unbearable. Not just the loss of people, but the loss of illusions. The illusion that someone will always be there to absorb your pain. The illusion that your worth is reflected in another's eyes. The illusion that compromise is always virtuous. To let those illusions go is to strip away layers you once believed were your skin. And yet, as they fall away, you find you are not exposed, you are revealed. The self beneath is not fragile, it is not lonely. It is vast, like a sky that does not end at the horizon, but stretches into a depth you cannot measure. There will be nights when you miss the old world, when you crave the easy reassurance of being told who you are, when the silence feels too wide and you long for someone else's voice to fill it. But these moments pass, and with each passing, you learn that the ache is not for the person or the role you left behind. It is for the familiarity of being known in a way that did not require you to truly be seen. And so the work deepens. You learn to hold the ache without pacifying it. You learn to let the longing burn without extinguishing it in another's arms. You let it teach you what it has always tried to say, that what you are seeking outside is not out there. It is already within you, waiting for the day you have the courage to stop searching. The more you trust that, the less you fear the solitude. In fact, you begin to crave it not because you have turned your back on love, but because you have learned the difference between love and dependency. One nourishes, the other consumes. One frees you, the other binds you. In this space, you realize something radical. You do not have to choose between love and yourself, but if forced, you will always choose yourself not out of selfishness, but out of the understanding that abandoning yourself for love is not love at all. It is here, in the quiet, that you finally see what Jung saw. Remaining single is not the rejection of connection. It is the refusal to betray your own becoming. There is a different kind of strength that grows here, not the hardened armor of someone who has sworn off intimacy, but the quiet solidity of someone who no longer needs to be completed. It is not a wall. It is a foundation. When you stand on it, the old fears lose their grip. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of not mattering to anyone, the fear of disappearing without an audience. These dissolve, not because you've proven yourself to the world, but because you've proven yourself to yourself. You begin to see how much of human connection is built on unspoken contracts. You will keep me from facing my emptiness, and I will keep you from facing yours. You will give me a sense of purpose, and I will give you a sense of worth. We will both agree to play our parts so neither of us has to confront the truth. When you've lived outside that contract long enough, you can no longer enter it blindly. You see the exchange for what it is, an agreement to maintain each other's illusions. And if you have walked through the deserts of your own mind and survived, you cannot return to that kind of bargain without a deep, quiet revolt in your soul. Jung knew that this revolt, this refusal to live in unconscious agreements, was dangerous in the eyes of the collective. A person who belongs to no one cannot be controlled by the same levers as everyone else. They do not respond to shame in the usual way. They are not seduced by flattery, nor threatened by withdrawal. They have seen what it costs to give away their center, and they will not pay that price again. But with this sovereignty comes a kind of aloneness that cannot be avoided. Not the loneliness of being unwanted, but the solitude of no longer needing to bend yourself to fit. You will watch people drift away not because they dislike you, but because they no longer recognize themselves in your reflection. The mirror you offer now is too honest, too unflattering to the image they want to keep. At first, this might sting. You might feel as though you've made yourself unreachable. But then you notice something unexpected. The connections that remain are clearer, truer, freer. You no longer attract those looking for a caretaker, a savior, or an emotional scaffold. You meet others who have stood in their own silence, who do not flinch at the truth, who know the difference between needing someone and choosing them. These meetings are rare, but they are alive. There is no pressure to be anything other than what you are in that moment. There is no silent bookkeeping of sacrifices made and debts owed. There is only presence, and in that presence, love becomes something far more powerful than possession. You see now why Jung placed such emphasis on the individual before the couple. The relationship between two individuated beings is not an escape hatch from solitude. It is an extension of it. Each remains whole, even in union. Each can walk away without losing themselves, and because of that, each stays not from fear of absence, but from love of the presence. But to reach that point, you must be willing to endure the long apprenticeship of aloneness, to strip away every false identity, every borrowed belief, every scripted reaction, to let your desires sharpen without rushing to fulfill them, to sit with the ache of being unseen and unvalidated until it no longer dictates your choices. This is why so many avoid the path, not because they do not want freedom, but because they cannot bear the cost of shedding what they have built to survive. It is easier to keep the marriage that suffocates than to face the nights alone. Easier to keep the relationship that dulls you than to face the raw possibility of an unmediated life. Yet there comes a point when the trade is no longer worth it, when the quiet death of your essence feels heavier than the fear of solitude, when you realize that no one else can carry the task of your becoming, no matter how much they love you. In that moment, the choice becomes clear. Even if it is painful, you step out of the roles, out of the agreements, out of the protective embrace of being someone's anything, and you become your own. From here, the work is not about building a fortress, but a sanctuary, a space where your own thoughts can stretch without interruption, where your own feelings can unfold without being explained away. It is in that sanctuary that your most dangerous ideas are born, the kind that refuse to fit inside the acceptable narratives of family dinners or polite conversation. And it is from that sanctuary that your deepest truths emerge, the ones you could never have spoken while living as someone else's half. You will still know moments of longing. You will still feel the pull toward connection. But the difference now is that you will not answer it out of desperation. You will answer only when it aligns with the truth you have fought to uncover. This is the essence of what Jung called the individuation process, the gradual, uncompromising alignment between who you are and how you live. It is not glamorous. It is not easy. But it is the only way to live a life that is truly yours. You begin to notice that the further you walk this path, the less you seek constant stimulation. The world's noise becomes a foreign language. Conversations that once felt necessary now seem hollow, like echoes from a life you no longer inhabit. Your attention sharpens. Your presence deepens. You no longer scatter yourself in 1,000 directions just to feel alive. In the silence, a different pulse emerges. Not the rush of adrenaline you felt when someone new desired you. Not the restless hum of wondering what others think, but a steady, grounded current that feels like it belongs to you alone. It is the rhythm of a self no longer divided against itself. Here, the idea of being single loses its edge. It is no longer a label that defines your social position, no longer a status that others measure against their own choices. It is simply the natural state of a person who refuses to bargain their truth for company. You see that the cultural fixation on relationships is not about love, but about predictability. A partnered life is easier for the collective to understand and control. A solitary life chosen consciously is unpredictable and therefore dangerous. Jung saw that danger as sacred, because unpredictability means freedom from the inherited script. It means the possibility of creating something entirely new, something born from your direct encounter with the unconscious rather than from recycled expectations. And that creation, whether it takes the form of art, ideas, or a way of living, can only emerge when you are willing to risk walking without a guide. The modern world disguises dependency as romance, compliance as harmony, and self-abandonment as love. It rewards those who adapt to the system's emotional economy, who trade authenticity for security and call it maturity. But once you've tasted the raw clarity of solitude, that trade feels poisonous. You would rather face the vast uncertainty of your own path than return to a life built on negotiated half-truths. This does not mean your days are without challenge. In fact, the challenges deepen, without someone else to soothe you in your weak moments. You must learn to hold yourself upright when everything in you wants to collapse, without someone to validate your worth. You must learn to see it clearly without reflection. Without someone to distract you from your inner storms, you must walk straight into them and endure the lightning. But in that endurance, you uncover a truth few ever touch. You are far more capable than the world led you to believe. The strength you once outsourced to a partner was always yours. The comfort you thought they provided was simply the absence of your own presence. Now that you are fully here, you see that the foundation you stand on is unshakable because it is not borrowed. Your dreams change shape in this space. They are no longer about proving yourself, impressing anyone, or securing a place in someone's life. They become less about outcomes and more about expressions of your vision, your values, your depth. You are not chasing validation. You are answering a call that comes from somewhere beyond the reach of other people's approval. This is where the fire of creativity burns brightest. When you are no longer performing for an audience, your work becomes dangerous not in the sense of harm, but in its power to disrupt, to awaken, to unsettle the lies people live by. It is the same fire that fueled Jung's own explorations, that drove him to wander into the uncharted territories of the psyche without waiting for permission. And yet, there is a humility that comes with it, because you realize that this path is not about being untouchable or above the human need for connection. It is about refusing to confuse connection with captivity. It is about loving without ownership, giving without losing yourself, and receiving without obligation. This kind of love, rare as it is, can only be born between two people who have faced their own shadows and claimed their own wholeness. Anything less becomes a quiet transaction of needs disguised as devotion. When you meet someone from this place, you will know it. There will be no rush to merge, no panic at the thought of absence. There will be space. Space for each of you to keep your own orbit, your own silence, your own center. And in that space, intimacy becomes something infinitely richer than dependency. Until then, you walk alone not as a rejection of others, but as a devotion to the self you have fought to uncover. Every step away from the roles you once played is a step toward the life that is yours alone to live. And in the quiet hours, when doubt creeps in and the old fears whisper that you will regret this path, you will remember the life built on someone else's terms may offer comfort, but it will never offer truth. And truth, once tasted, is not something you can go back from. There comes a night when you feel the full weight of what you've chosen. The room is silent, the world outside moving on without you, and you realize that no one is coming to fill this space. No one to text you good night, no one to call and tell you the day will be better tomorrow. And in that moment, a wave of grief rises not for the absence of a person, but for the loss of the self you used to be, the one who always had someone to lean on, someone to distract from the quiet. You let the grief come. You let it pull you down into its depths, because you know now that resisting it would be another form of escape. And as it moves through you, something extraordinary happens. The fear that used to live inside this grief is gone. The pain is there. Yes, raw, honest, but the terror is missing. You are not afraid of being here. You are not afraid of the silence anymore. Jung would say that this is the threshold where solitude becomes fertile, where what once felt like emptiness begins to feel like potential, the unbroken ground in which something wholly your own can take root. It is here that your mind starts to reorganize itself, free from the constant adjustments required by shared life. Your values sharpen. Your desires become unmistakable. You begin to see the patterns you have lived by, the ones inherited without question, and you feel no obligation to keep them. The work of individuation is often described as a journey toward wholeness, but it is also a dismantling, a burning away of the scaffolding you built to hold up the image of yourself you thought was real. This burning is not romantic. It leaves you raw, stripped of familiar comforts, but it also leaves you light enough to move without the dead weight of pretense. From this stripped state, you start to understand why so many never make it here. It's not because they are weak, but because the culture has trained them to believe that their worth is inseparable from being chosen. To walk away from that belief is to walk into social exile. You will be misunderstood. You will be called distant, difficult, damaged. But these labels, once they no longer touch your truth, lose their power. You no longer need to be seen as good in order to be at peace. You no longer shape yourself to fit the collective's comfort. You have seen what it costs to be loved for a version of yourself that is not real, and you would rather be alone in your truth than adored for your mask. This is the kind of freedom that terrifies people, because it cannot be bargained with. The free person does not cling when threatened, does not flatter when cornered, does not dilute their voice to be understood. They live in a kind of inner authority that needs no external validation. And yet, this freedom does not make you untouchable. It makes you available in a way that is rare, because when you have nothing to prove, nothing to gain from someone's approval, you can meet them without the distortions of need, you can listen without defensiveness, speak without manipulation, love without the undercurrent of fear. Jung believed that such a state was not only possible, but necessary for any deep relationship. Without it, the bond will always be contaminated by the silent demand to be made whole by the other. With it, love becomes a choice that can be renewed daily, not a contract you cling to out of fear of the alternative. From here, you might find that relationships no longer occupy the center of your life, not because you've turned against them, but because they are no longer the axis around which your identity spins. The center is within you now, steady and unmoving, whether someone walks beside you or not. You see clearly how much energy you once spent maintaining harmony at the cost of honesty, how many dreams you shelved to avoid conflict, how much of your life was lived in reaction to another's moods, needs, and expectations. And you know with a quiet certainty that you will not return to that way of living. The path ahead is not without its challenges. You will still face moments when the old habits call you back, when it seems easier to compromise your truth than to endure another person's disappointment. But each time you choose yourself, the choice becomes less of a struggle and more of a reflex. Not the reflex of selfishness, but of self-loyalty. You start to understand, in your bones, that the greatest betrayal is not when someone leaves you. It is when you leave yourself, and the greatest act of love is to refuse that betrayal, even when the cost is high. In this way, remaining single at least for this season of your life is not a rejection of love, but a discipline, a practice of returning, again and again, to the source within you until it becomes the only place from which you live. When that happens, you stop fearing the empty bed, the solitary meal, the unshared holiday. You know that these are not signs of a life lacking. They are the signs of a life that is yours,